since 2010 and has worked within the horticultural display team. And then I think in 2017 travelled over to the UK to help establish a Mediterranean biome at the Eden Project. So I'll hand it over to Alison to chat with us. Thanks. Oh, you might be on mute, Alison.
There we go, rookie error. Sorry about that, everyone. Good morning, everybody. Thanks for inviting me to talk, Cherie. I'm just going to give a little overview of my time at the Eden Project back in 2017. So a little bit about me. I grew up in England. I worked at RHS Garden Wisley for 5 years before coming to Australia in 2009 via 4 wonderful weeks at the Adelaide Botanic Garden. Hi, guys. And then I've since been in the Horticultural Displays team at Kings Park since 2010. After hearing about this project from the then Senior Curator, Grady Brand, I was immediately drawn to the opportunity to be able to showcase the amazing Western Australian flora that I'd fallen in love with in the UK, where I grew up. So in 2016, oh, what's happened there? My presentation's disappeared. Sorry. Sure what's going on there. Okay, sorry. So yeah, in 2016, I applied for the Vic Galea Scholarship and an RHS bursary, and I was fortunate enough to be awarded both of those, which then enabled me to travel across to the UK and spend 3 weeks in Cornwall at the Eden Project, primarily assisting with the planting and establishment of the display, but also having the opportunity to work in the rainforest biome, some of the Mediterranean beds up at the top of the pit, and also meeting and collaborating with staff from the National Botanic Garden in Wales and visiting Tresco Abbey Gardens in the Scilly Isles, who have an amazing collection of Western Australian flora growing outside, believe it or not. So I'm just going to give you a little snapshot, hopefully, of our collaboration with the Eden Project. Obviously, I have selected bits of info of my journey along the way. So just a bit about the Eden Project. So it's located in Cornwall, about 6 hours southwest of London. And the project was created in a disused China clay mining pit and was opened in March 2001 as part of a Millennium Project in the UK. And the Eden Project is an educational charity and a social enterprise. Their global mission is to connect humans with one another and also the natural world and explore how we can work better together towards a better future for all living things. So the site itself, it's 13 hectares, and that just gives you a little bit of a before and after, the pit as it was and the Eden Project as it is now, which is quite amazing when you see that transformation. So on your arrival at the top of the pit at Eden, your eye is drawn down to these 2 huge domes. Each of these domes comprises of different tubular steel hexagon, pentagon and triangle shapes. So they're a double layer, 2 metre deep, strong, transparent, lightweight thermoplastic, and each shape gives a different size, and that gives more strength to the structure as a whole. Now, these shapes within the biome, they can be deflated and inflated to assist with temperature control. And there's also vents that allow air movement in and out of the biome to assist as well. These 2 biomes are faced south to maximise the light and the warmth from the sun. So on the left here, you can see the hot, humid tropical rainforest biome, and that's one of the largest collections of its kind. So it's a whopping 16,000 square metres, 50 metres high and 240 metres long. And when you're in there, it's quite possible to feel as though you're immersed in a jungle surrounded by plants, sweating in the humidity. To the right here, this is the cool temperate Mediterranean biome, maintained at a temperature range of 9 to 25 degrees. The biome itself, it's a little bit smaller than the rainforest biome at 6,540 metres squared and a height of 30 metres. And this middle section of the biome at the front here, that's where the Kwongan bed that I'll talk about in a minute is situated. I love this picture because you can see the two brave souls up the top there cleaning the biome. So a little bit about where the display started. The collaboration between Kings Park and the Eden Project started back in 2012, so 13 years ago, when the then manager of the enclosed biomes, Dina Gallick, visited Western Australia and was blown away by the flora. She then got in touch with our CEO at the time, and Mark Webb, and he visited the Eden Project. And from then on, the collaboration commenced. Lots of regular consultation with our Senior Curator here at Kings Park, Grady Brand. So since opening, the Mediterranean biome had showcased a collection of Californian, South African and Mediterranean basin flora. And the Eden Project, they sought to further expand that collection of med flora by incorporating the Western Australian flora. So in consultation with us here at Kings Park, they decided to display flora, representative flora from the Banksia woodland, Jarrah forest and Kwongan ecological communities. And thought was given to different growing conditions, where to source West Australian species and their cultivation requirements when making plant selection for the display. So from 2012 to 17, there was 5 years of planning, design, species recommendation, sourcing, discussions, propagating tips and suggestions, lots of consideration given to quarantine information, and then also the interpretation of the display. And this was over many emails and many Skype sessions. 2016, Catherine Cutler, the then supervisor of the Mediterranean Biome, visited us here in Kings Park and had the opportunity to gather further information, visit our nursery, our collections in ground, and liaise with many of the staff on site. We also had the opportunity to head up to the Midwest and look at the wildflowers, myself and Amanda Shade and Catherine, which was a really wonderful opportunity to then actually showcase the flora actually out in the field. So I'm going to go back to just how, just take you on a bit of a journey, I guess. So prior to the West Australian exhibit going in, the Californian collection was in the beds that were then transformed. And I hope this just gives an idea of a bit of the level of transformation involved. The Californian collection was rationalised. It was the collection of flora that didn't do the best in the biome. So they've rationalised the collection to a smaller section within the biome. And the entire collection was removed over winter 2016-2017, including those two huge palms you can see in the background there. So preparation then followed, and during that same winter, 2016-17, diggers, forklifts, hand tools, all on site, removing around 100 cubic tonnes of soil to a depth of about 60 centimetres. This was replaced with a sterile, pH neutral, free draining media comprising of 50% composted bark and 50% Cornish grit. The Eden Science team worked on the soil blend with the advice of us here in the Western Australian Botanic Garden, trialling a selection of blends before making the final choice. And as is the sustainable and environmental nature of the Eden Project, the soil was removed and relocated elsewhere on site for another project that was being undertaken. So this is just a little snapshot of the site once it was cleared and levelled and set, ready to go. It was quite daunting in a way, arriving on site early March in 2017 and seeing this. This is me here putting out traffic cones where we were hoping to put the grass trees in. And at this stage, we hadn't actually been out to the nursery to visit any of the stock. We had no idea of the size of the plants, the amount of plants that would be available to build the display. So the first few days, as I said, we didn't go out to the nursery. One of the first things we did was add some structure to the display using some dead plant material. And there was some charred branches from 2 dead oak trees that were put in just to create some height in the bed and just to convey the message of fire in our West Australian landscape. Both of these were tested for Phytophthora remora, which is sudden oak death, which is a problem over there in the UK. So here we have our living structure, show-stopping living structure that came in the form of 11 Xanthorrhoea johnsonii. I love this picture because to me it sort of symbolises 2 worlds, the UK with the daffodils and then the Australian with the grass trees. It was unfortunate. We had hoped to include Xanthorrhoea presii, which is one of our local species of grass tree here in Western Australia. However, it just wasn't possible to source the number that we needed and to ensure that they would arrive in good condition being transported from Australia, let alone all the quarantine and biosecurity issues involved with that as well. So the decision was made to source these Xanthorrhoea johnsonii from a nursery in Holland, be an easier option and a better outcome. So during the consultation period of the display, we decided, I say we, Grady and the Eden team decided that the imagery of the West Australian landscape was the important factor, and accurate botanical provenance is desirable, but due to availability, transportation, quarantine restrictions, in some instances, we would have to make allowances for the inclusion of species not necessarily endemic to Western Australia, and also including hybrids with Western Australian parentage. So here we are putting in the grass trees. I was super relieved that we didn't have to dig these holes. We had an amazing garden development team at Eden assisting with their digger and their telescopic handler to assist in getting these behemoths in the ground. You can see here they're putting in some mycorrhizal product, Symbio Mycoforce transplanter, which they believe assists in improving transplant survival and growth acceleration when initially putting these types of big transplants in the ground. Unfortunately, one of the grass trees senesced during the quarantine period. So we decided to take the opportunity to knock the top off and plant it close to the path, just to give visitors the opportunity to see the structure of the grass trees and how they're held together and sort of convey that message of the slow growth over time. So just a little touch on the retic. Our advice to Eden was to get rid of the sprinklers and install the trickle system. That's something that we've done progressively throughout the West Australian Botanic Garden. We find it's a much better option for our species here. It leads to less fungal issues. It's a much more efficient way of watering. So we made that recommendation. That steep slope there that you see was pretty tricky. There was a series of pressure regulators had to be installed all the way down to ensure even watering throughout the site. Eden are very much a great example of harvesting rainwater. So the main supply to the biomes is from rainwater channeled from the surface runoff from the biomes. There's vast hoppers at the base of each biome, and they make a great collection system for the water. They can fill enough water to fill 20,000 baths a day. So the hoppers themselves store enough water to cover a drought period of up to 8 weeks, and only 21% of the project's water demands are drawn from mains, and that's for the supply for drinking water, catering and washrooms. So it's a pretty impressive setup. So finally, 3 days into our visit, we headed to the nursery. And this was a wonderful opportunity for us because we also had 2 staff here, James Kettle and Marilla Burgess from National Botanic Garden Wales. So it was another opportunity for further information sharing with another botanical organisation that has a huge glasshouse collection of Mediterranean species, including Australian species. And here we've got Dina Gallick, Manager of the Biomes, Catherine Cutler, Med Biome Supervisor, and Sally Bigden, who was an amazing sort of part of this whole process, the propagation that she was able to achieve was quite something. So we headed to the nursery. It's 5 miles from the Eden site. So we considered it was more productive to actually go across there, have a look at all the stock before making a decision about what should come across to the biome for planting. Because once those plants are out of that nursery off-site, they have to go back into quarantine for another 3 months. So making careful and considered decisions at that stage was really quite important. It was incredible to see. When we walked into that glass house and we saw the range and quality of plants ready for planting, we were just blown away. The sourcing, there were some nurseries and botanic gardens in the UK that do have plants that they were able to sell or share with the Eden Project. We also had a number of microprop grevilleas coming from WA Botanicals. A lot of specimens were grown from seed, and that was supplied from Nindathana, which is a seed stockist of WA natives near Albany in Western Australia. So something else that kind of blew me away was the quarantine timeframes as well. We're so used to having our amazing stock of nursery just grown here in Kings Park. It's almost luxurious compared to this. Those grass trees, once they arrived at Eden, they had to be in quarantine for 1 year down at the nursery. Any seed raised material, once germinated, was quarantined for 3 months. So sourcing and growing the collection was a long process, sort of 4 years to get to this stage to be able to start planting. And it was a continuous trial and error with advice from the staff at Kings Park. Initial recommendations is just another view there of some of the amazing stock we had. Lots of things to be borne in mind. As I said, quarantine, pest and disease issues, climate and soil differences. Obviously PBR on a lot of the hybrid material. And then considering things like the potential for domestic seed supply, funding and trialling. And many different species and propagation techniques were new to the Eden nursery staff. So there was always that element of trial and error throughout the process. So here we are, the first bed. This is a representation of the Bankshire Jarrah woodland ecological communities. There you can see those charred oak trees there. So a little bit of a focus, as I said, on the role of fire in these environments, highlighting some of the key plants in these ecological communities, and explaining a little bit how under threat this beautiful environment is from a number of different factors like logging, agriculture, mining, disease, even excessive controlled fire events, and how important the safeguarding of this type of environment is, with a view to maintaining the ecosystem and the flora and fauna therein. Just looking from the other side here. So this was quite a tricky site to work on, very steep, sort of tiptoeing and balancing as you're making your way up and down the slope. We had 7 different Bankshire species initially to create that real Bankshire focus throughout, as it was one of the themes. So we had Brownie Eye, Bankshire formosa, Grandis, Alicifolia, Littoralis, Menziesii, and Undata. And then along the top, we had Albizia placed to ideally sort of screen at the top of the slope and make that distinction between the remaining Californian display. And over to the far side, some more height and structure, hopefully in time, from Corymbia ficifolia hybrids to border that. And there's some very weird glitchy things here happening that I don't think I'm doing. Sorry, I must be. So whilst not initially planted, there were some Eucalyptus marginata, Jarrah seedlings growing on in the nursery. And of course, they would never be expected to meet their full potential in this setting. But the hope was, I don't think they've come to fruition, was to have a few just growing, just as a reference to that Jarrah woodland. So a number of more instant impact. You can see there's some acacias there flowering already, kangaroo paw cultivars, grevillea hybrids, scaevola and Hardenbergia all brought quite a quick impact to the display, in addition to the structure from some of those bigger elements there. Sorry, my mouse. So just put this planting list up. I realise there's a lot of information there, but you'll be able to look back on it if you're interested. I've just highlighted in green those that particularly stand out as having performed particularly well. Those in grey have not, or have had mixed success, and those that I haven't highlighted have sort of ticked along and gone okay. I think one of the biggest disappointments was the Albizia. They lost all but two very early on. They didn't really put their roots down. The two that did survive, they collected some seed, which was great for further propagation. Some successes, the Banksia menziesii and the undata flowered, and they were able to collect seed from the Banksia undata, which was great. And the grevilleas have all grown away really nicely and created quite a colourful understory around the Xantheria in this bed. So the central bed, it's the smallest of three, put together to be like a really highly decorative display. So as you approach the Western Australian Gardens from either end, your eye is immediately drawn in. So this colourful display kind of pulls you in, and it's, I guess, fairly simply planted. It's got a couple of the grass trees, some Eucalyptus caesia, Banksia coccinea. They were hoped to give some taller, eye-catching structure, and then there's a big number of Anaxanthus throughout this bed. So the use of the contrasting colours and some successional everlasting sowings, as well as things like Pimelia ferruginea hybrids, and some Scaevola cultivars for some real sort of colourful, fairly consistent, impactful planting. Also with things like the kangaroo paws and the Scaevolas and the annuals, the hope was that there might be the opportunity for certain species, perhaps UK gardeners could try at home. So here's a bed list here. As you can see, there's a huge number of hybrid kangaroo paws, and also grevilleas too, and a big number of Scaevolas. I think this is probably a bed that will evolve in time, which I will touch on shortly. So the third bed, running along the front of the biome, as I showed you in one of my earlier slides. So that reaches from the South African display through to that Mediterranean cork display. And then at one end, there's a Bidawong meeting circle, much like the one that we have, a smaller version of the one that we have here in Kings Park, where visitors would have the opportunity to learn more about Indigenous culture, WA flora and fauna. So on this bed, considerations were made to given to keep more lower growing, more typical Kwongan heathland species throughout this display. Some of the larger specimens were dotted throughout, just to have a bit of height variation, and in particular towards the back there on that the back of the biome side that you can see there, things like Kunzea, some Calathemnus and Banksia species, just to help screen that off a little bit and soften the impact of that backdrop. Some more showy specimens placed through the front, so things like the Macropidia fuliginosa, the black kangaroo paw, again some Anaxanthus hybrids and Piebelius to make that crossover to that central bed, and some things like Acacia glaucoptera, just to name a few, which has flowered well on and off. Then we did have some larger specimens that were grown on in air pots, and these were put around that meeting circle, that meeting place, for more of an instant impact, to help Eden storytellers convey the messaging from the exhibit. So things like, we had an Acacia cyclops, for example, that already had flower and seed on it, and that was one of the things to talk about symbiotic relationships between Western Australian flora and fauna, that the ants are attracted to the red aril around the seed and then transfer the seed underground and it germinates. Those kinds of like little interesting facts. So here's the Kwongan planting list. I think through all of these beds, it's nice to see that there has been a range of different genera that has performed well. And I think that's really important to retaining the integrity of these displays. Sourcing wise, as I said earlier, a lot came from Nindathana, the seed stockist here. Things like acacia, banksia, callistemon, eucalyptus, hakeas all came from seed. There are a couple of places like the Old Walled Garden Nursery in the UK, which supplied some of the Kunzia, the Melaleuca and the callistemon. And then there was also that opportunity, I know the Welsh Botanic Garden also supplied some of their material from within their glasshouse as well. So it's been great to see things like the Banksia burdettii, Media and Menzesii have all grown away beautifully in this bed. Others, such as the Coccinia, Banksia coccinia and the grandis, they've really struggled with winter fungal issues and etiolation and have either died or are quite weak in their growth habit. So I think they did try a selection of direct sown ephemerals actually over one of the summers. It just didn't work out very well. Water supply was tricky due to an extended period of drought. So there's been some challenges. So information interpretation of the display. So a number of black botanical labels with common names are used throughout the display. Some of them do have an artist's impression of the flower, as you can see here with the Banksia coccinia, and a little bit more information about the species. And then each bed has a sign similar to this, the same artwork, which is similar to that used within the artwork on the footpaths and around the meeting place. So it's just talking a little bit about each bed, giving visitors a very small snapshot into, what is the Kwongan? I remember when I first heard that word, I thought, gosh, what is that? And the sandy plain, and it's, some of the oldest, poorest soil on Earth, but it has the most incredible flora that's adapted over many years. A little bit about us as well, Kings Park's collaboration with the project and our collaboration with the Whadjuk Noongar people and Richard Wally, one of the elders in the storytelling and the artwork involved in the display. And then a bit about the Jarrah, Banksia, that role of fire in the landscape and the adaptations of the plant life therein. It's very hard to convey key messages in a very small space, but hopefully we've done a reasonable job in that. Another aspect of interpretation at Eden is storytelling. It's a huge part of what they do, and they have regular sessions within the biome, usually 15 to 30-minute sessions twice a day. It gives the opportunity to bring life to the exhibits and just kind of convey the important stories about what people are seeing as they make their way through the biome. So we met with 4 storytellers and just gave them some key messages to give you an idea, things like the Macropedia is monotypic. It's found nowhere else on Earth. Those flora-fauna relationships I mentioned earlier. The relationship of our flora with fire, the need for smoke for certain species to germinate, fire for regeneration with certain species. And then it also is the opportunity to convey messaging for Indigenous culture as well, which, as I said, we collaborated with Richard Wally here in Kings Park. And also a little snapshot of making some of the plants available to the public. So you can see here we've got some kangaroo paws in pots planted around the meeting place, and they then had some for sale up at the shop up at the Eden Project, which is quite nice to see, and just a different way of growing them in the UK, perhaps treating them as an annual or bringing them in somewhere warm over winter. So this is the display 4 months on, the first summer, taken from the top of the Banksia Jarrah woodland down to the central bed across to the Kwongan. Before we left, we sort of left some cultural notes, I guess, different suggestions, things like plugging up the retic around the grass trees to make sure they could have a deeper watering less often. To the base, avoiding watering overhead for fungal issues. We talked about the different fertiliser requirements, obviously low phosphorus. Perhaps fertilising every 6 months in this setting might be worth trying to keep the display going. Trialling with kangaroo paw pruning, successional pruning at different times of the year to maintain a colourful display, but also keep the new flowers coming through. And just different pruning suggestions for different species and what we find works. And with consideration to kind of ongoing staggered light pruning to manage etiolation and maintain space between plants for the airflow. So there have been a number of pest and disease issues over this time. This is just little snapshots that I've been given from time to time. So they have had Phytophthora in there. They have treated that with, I think, where are we, like a biological fungicide, which they have used in the past, which has managed to sort of stop the progress of the disease. They just used something they'd trialled before in the South African collection that worked well. There's been many fungal issues. It seems to be particularly over winter when it's cooler, but there is still humidity within the biome. So they've been trying to vent more to let more airflow through, and they've also used a biofungicide like Prestop as a foliar application. Many little pesties, spider mites, thrips, mealybugs, whitefly, scale have also been an issue. They prefer to use biocontrols between spring and autumn as a way to try and manage these pests, only using pesticide as a last resort. I believe any scale issues have been well treated, usually with pest oil. So some highlights up to 2019. So just some images here that just show just really how well the display has done. As I said before, like a nice mix of different genera, really bringing integrity to the different displays within this collection. And this just lovely collection here. So the Melaleuca fulgens, Grevillea superb, and then that mix of kangaroo paws really added an ongoing consistent display. So it was pretty good colour throughout the year. This is one of my favourites. The Xantheria johnsonii both flowered in the central bed. Others have flowered in other areas of the collection. Apparently they're much loved by visitors. They're so unusual. Lots of people haven't seen grass trees before. And they also had a pair of dunnocks, the little bird pictured there, nesting in one of the grass trees one of the summers. So that's very sweet as well. So key outcomes. It's the first time a significant permanent display of Western Australian flora of this kind has been established in the UK, which I think is really exciting. Not everybody gets to come to Western Australia and see our amazing flora, and to be able to convey the messages about the importance of this flora, the biodiverse nature, the conservation messaging, I think is just a wonderful opportunity. Also a huge thing for me is developing that ongoing collaborative relationship with other botanical and horticultural organisations internationally, I think is incredibly exciting. So this visit alone, we had the opportunity to spend that time with the Eden Project, the National Botanic Garden of Wales, and also Tresco Abbey Garden, and talk about how best to create these displays, propagation techniques, cultivation ideas, possibility for sharing seed and plant material. It's really exciting to instigate and continue these relationships and learn from one another. There's also an opportunity for us to promote our work that we carry out here in Kings Park, our conservation of our biodiverse flora, the education and information that we're able to disseminate about Western Australia. I think as well, another important aspect that ties in so well with the Eden Project is that conveying those messages of the traditional landowners, the Whadjuk Noongar people, and being able to retell that with the use of artwork, the storytelling, and just the relationship they have with the land, the flora and the fauna, I think is really important to maintain as part of this collaboration. Hopefully, ongoing opportunity for supply of domestic seed. That's something we're still investigating, and showcasing some of our plant development hybrids, and that's something that still is ongoing with recent breeding work that's happened. And there was significant media coverage, which was great for encouraging people to come to Western Australia, highlighting the work that we do and talking about these kind of horticultural and botanical collaborations in a very public forum, I think is a really positive thing. So 2022 onwards, I think I better go a bit quicker. I think I'm probably taking a bit too long. Our Hort trainee, now a wonderful member of our nursery team here at Kings Park, Pascal Purser went and did a week's work experience with the IN project and 2 weeks at the National Botanic Garden Wales. I was also over, so we had the opportunity to meet with the team there and just reconnect and talk about sort of going forward with the display. Revisiting some challenges, so drips from the biome skin, wetter pockets from plants at the bottom of the site, at the bottom of the slope there. So just talking about different, using different species and how we can manage these issues in a productive way. The etiolation, the continued leaning of different species on that sloped site. You know, again, using different species to maybe mitigate those issues, potential for different pruning techniques. Pests are ongoing, even things like birds that sometimes come through and remove 70% of the rhodanthe that have been planted in one go, which is very disappointing, I imagine. Ongoing disease issues, and then cultivation going forward. That the soil mix has no cohesion, and so it's been difficult to stake plants. Transpires the fertilizer didn't quite have enough phosphorus. It was no P rather than low P. So some soil testing just to sort of nut out some issues with best fertilizer requirements going forward. And a little bit around spacing plants. It's quite a busy display, so allow more airflow, a bit more light, the opportunity for successional planting now that their nursery is operational, and a bit more pruning, sort of more frequently and lighter rather than hard pruning, as a lot of the plants don't seem to tolerate that well in that setting. So here's a beautiful Corymbia physofolia hybrid grown away and flowering beautifully in the biome, summer 2022. So now that the Eden nursery is up and running, we'll look to supply, hopefully, some of the Kings Park hybrids going forward. And unfortunately, since COVID, the seed sourcing has become a challenge. Lindisfarne no longer supplies seed internationally, which is a huge loss. They already had everything set up, ready to go for shipping seed. So we need to revisit the potential for a supplying domesticated seed, or possibly some seed from BGPA, if possible, going forward. So new directions. Catherine's quite keen to develop that central bed into a more ethnobotanical display, focusing on medicinal bush tucker plants, traditional Noongar uses. Sort of educating again on those relationships that humans share with plants. Potential for inclusion of flora from other Western Australian ecological communities and regions, bearing in mind, you know, what's possible to propagate, source and grow in this type of environment. Perhaps a focus on, you know, plant adaptations, unusual plants, threatened species and why they're threatened. And I think there's the opportunity to expand the interpretive signage and messaging going forward with this in mind. So the IN projects had a hugely challenging time. They lost a lot of staff over COVID. The biomes were managed by very, very skeletal staff. So pests, diseases, weeds have kind of ravaged over that time, but they've really regrouped now. They've got much more staff coming back on board. They've got their nursery up and running, which sounds amazing. And you can see here, this is a picture in June 2022. So despite a tricky period with lots of challenges, it's looking great. And I think the potential now going forward is huge. Their nursery sounds amazing. You can find out more information if you have a Google. They've got this huge area, rainwater storage capacity, geothermal heating to the glass houses, potential to propagate up to 1 billion plants for all uses throughout the display at Eden internally, both biomes, all the food production. So I think now we're in probably quite a strong position, hopefully, to move forward with this sort of resurgence in staff and resources, to move forward with perhaps the thing with the display again. So thank you all for listening. Hopefully some interesting little snippets there. If you've got any questions, feel free to ask me. There's my email address there as well. I have the bursary report from my time at the Eden Project, which I'd happily email on if anybody would like to peruse the information at a more leisurely pace. Thank you.
Thanks, Alison. Thank you for for the talk about the project. It sounds amazing.
No worries. Sorry if I went too long. I think I may have done. Sorry, Jo.
No, that's okay. I'll introduce Jo straight away, so you can get started. Jo McAuliffe works with Australian National Botanic Gardens, and I think over 30 years experience with them. Currently nursery manager, and he's going to talk about the new Ian Potter National Conservatory with us today. So thank you, Jo, for coming along.
No worries. Thank you. Thanks for joining us. Thanks, Alison, for that very interesting talk. I was constantly thinking about, oh my God, we've got to think about this on all those aspects, but it's sort of is a much larger project than what we're doing here. Nonetheless, fairly important though. I'm just going to try to share my screen. Going, have you got that?
Yep, all good. I can see it.
Great. Okay, so Ian Potter National Conservatory. It's probably the largest horticultural project that I've been involved in during my career here at the Gardens. Why do we want a tropical conservatory? Well, I think with our visitation, we get a really high visitation. For those people who don't know, the Australian National Botanic Gardens is a specialist native botanic gardens. It's pretty much all we grow. There are some exceptions to that though. And we've got a fantastic rainforest gully, but what we wanted to do is to be able to show people all of these or some of those tropical plants that we just can't grow outside. We were missing that opportunity, and the Gardens started pursuing this amazing project. Crofi are the designers, our architects for this. So it's when I first saw the design, I basically thought, you're kidding me, right? I can't see this thing working because it's essentially a concrete building. So you know, if someone came to me and said, oh, let's build a conservatory, what would I build? Well, it would just be a whopping great big glass house because I know they work. But to create a space like Crofi has done with this building, it's going to be really amazing. So the concept is that people will walk into the conservatory and they'll be instantly immersed in an Australian wet tropic rainforest. And then they'll walk out onto a balcony over here, and then they'll be able to look down on a completely different type of exhibit. They'll then be able to walk down into that exhibit, which I'll explain a bit later. The building itself is around about 15 metres high. So it's much, much higher than what we're used to being able to grow things here in the Gardens. So our greenhouses top out about 3.5 metres tall. So that'll be nice to be able to have things to be able to stretch out. Okay, getting into our greenhouses, that image on the right is from our old display greenhouse, which we actually decommissioned in 2015 to make way for the plants to be grown for this new conservatory. So those other two images, one is the Angiopteris ovecta, which has been in our collection here in the gardens for 50 years, which is really significant given that the gardens is only 50 years old as well. And you can sort of see how empty that greenhouse was back then. And one of those considerations for if we're going to take on a project like this is how many plants do we actually need to be successful? So all the way through this project, we've been thinking, well, for every sort of plant we've got on display, we kind of need 2 plants back up in our backup facilities to be able to draw on and use if something was to go wrong. There's in Canberra, if people ask me what is our biggest sort of hurdle to get over in growing tropical plants, believe it or not, for me, it's not temperature and it's light because during Canberra's winter, our light levels really plummet to, really poor levels, and they stay rock bottom for a number of months until around about this time of year when we start getting an increase. So, you might think of a wet season and a dry season if you're in far north Queensland or if you're across the top end of Australia. But when you're bringing those things into horticulture in a place like Canberra, we start thinking about a high light season and a low light season. And we still have these seasonal sort of influences, but they're driven by a different factor, and it's not temperature and it's not water, it's light. And with that drop of light, then our management practices of all those other horticultural factors like watering change at that point. Pests are obviously, when you take something thousands of kilometres away from its home and you move it into a controlled space, then pests are a constant problem. And we rely heavily on biological program to help manage that. We also have a really successful program of volunteers that come in and basically help us squash bugs. So that's all working really well. And with the biological program and our commitment to making things work, then that's been quite successful so far. The other thing that we do look at is actually taking plants and removing them from the collection if, from pest management perspective, if they're not viable. And then there are also other factors that come into play, the condition and the size of our backup facilities sort of determine what we can and can't grow. We've got 5 controlled environments that we can shift plants around in, but as I said before, a top out limit of around about 3.5 metres tall is a real constraint for us. So it's one thing to keep in mind. So that's what that once empty greenhouse now looks like, bursting at the seams with plants. And most of our houses resemble this at the moment. So, the space is one thing, but how long the process is before, getting ready for and building the collection and then having those doors of the conservatory open to us for planting, and that time delay between those 2 points is very important. And we've found that with delays in the build that we've actually had to significantly change direction a number of times with the types of plants that we're growing. If there was one big frustration for me on a project like this, then that's it, because you work really hard to get a successful product, and then by no one's fault, you've actually got to change that. Okay, one of the main considerations for us that we weren't quite sure about in this build was what soils do we use? I heard Alison, it was quite interesting listening to Alison talk about that. We engaged Sydney Environmental Soil Laboratory, SESL Australia, basically to recommend the soil profiles that we would be using for that. So, a long story cut short, we ended up installing some trials. So you can sort of see these large root control bags here. Each one was a replica of a soil profile designed by SESL. We were trialling for the main rainforest exhibit a ferrosol-based soil, which is basically a rich volcanic derived clay media. And then downstairs is significantly different with a very free draining candesol media. But as you can sort of see, the plants that we've got growing in those trials indicated to us that they could be very, very successful. But we kind of the whole point of doing them is to say, well, if there are going to be problems with it, then what are those problems, and can we preempt remedying those problems for our conservatory? And the answer was, yeah, we might have problems with, say, this particular ferrosol intergrade, with a deficiency or something that we've had leaf analysis done. It just basically provided us with an insight, a quick look at what the problems might be, and then we can now be prepared when the conservatory is built to sort of remedy those. No planting's really straightforward, is it? So, and this is just our main rainforest chamber. You can kind of see that there's a rock feature here, and there's a main path that comes out in a triangular shape to get people through it. You know, it's not a massive display. We're talking roughly 12.5 metres squared. Okay, so it's not like the Eden project where you've got these beautiful big open spaces to be able to do work in. Ours is quite constrained. It means our plant selection is really critical. The spaces between all of these plants is really critical. So you can sort of see the work that we've done here. What we don't want is to be putting, you know, large canopy trees in too close to the walls and having them press up to the walls 5 years later. So you can sort of see the red is the space of a root ball, and you can kind of see the projected canopy size. And we've drawn all that in to help us understand the spacings required for the display. So that's just a sort of snapshot of, you know, these are just our major plantings that we've got going in. There's a whole number of plants that'll go in to the display as well. But this is just the backbones of it. To create those backbones, of course, you know, our greenhouses, as I mentioned, are 3.5 metres tall, and we cannot grow canopy plants for the conservatory. So we're actually outsourcing that through Emaho trees. So the image on the left there is James standing in front of a tree that we've purchased. We've got 2 trees around about 5.5 metres tall, perhaps even 6 metres tall by the time they get delivered to Canberra. And they'll be dug up and installed into the conservatory. They'll be picked up by a massive crane and put through the roof of our conservatory and somehow magically planted in position. I don't know how that's going to happen. And then the two images on the right are palms that we've got growing from a palm grower in down near Brisbane. So without them, we couldn't create that instant rainforest feel for our visitors. part of that canopy experience in any rainforest, at least, is the epiphytes and the diversity of epiphytes that you get in the rainforest canopies. Crofi, our architects, came up with a concept of a living chandelier with these kind of plants in there. In fact, they didn't really care what kind of plants we used. They just came up with the concept of living chandeliers. We took that concept, we had to own it, and so we had to create our interpretation of that living chandelier. So an image on the right there sort of shows what we've done to date. That's one example, at least, of what we've done to date to create this living chandelier. So these stainless steel mesh tubes will be hoisted up into the canopy, above the canopy, in the canopy and below the canopy to give you that effect of a chandelier, but also that the diversity just keeps going up through the canopy. Those plants, by the way, are a number of species of Dischidia. To complement that, and of course, because we're not in the conservatory, we don't understand what the horticultural conditions, extremes might be like and whether plants will like it or not. We hedge our bets and we say, well, Dischidias that's why we selected them, and they are very hardy and very adaptable. But we want to give a whole heap of other things a go as well. So, a lot of fern species, and you can sort of see here, Platycerium, common sort of epiphyte ferns, easy to grow, and that's a stunning display that we've created there. Drinaria as well here. So different, whilst it's going to be part of that chandelier, it'll have a different shape and give a completely different look and feel to that chandelier effect. We're also growing, if you can see this image here, some of the vines and things that I like to put into the conservatory are incredibly aggressive things. And I feared that if we included those sort of plants in our very small garden, then eventually that very small garden is going to be dominated by nothing but some of these plants. So we're actually growing them on these stainless steel tubes. We'll then sever them as soon as they're established enough from their pot, and they'll be constrained to the tube and only the tube. And then there's some other more experimental things. So this small image on the right here is the start of one of the Australian rhododendrons that we're growing epiphytically. And that, if it works, and it's so far so good, should be a really interesting, stunning display once it flowers. Just demonstrating the kinds of diversity that we're going to be putting through our display. Downstairs will be a completely different feel. So you'll be coming from the rainforest chamber down into a more of a dry woodland experience that you might find in Kakadu. Part of that experience will be a series of library bays. Library bays or our plant library is a concept came up by our architects, Crofi. And it's a really good experience or opportunity to experience and learn about all the sorts of things that we're displaying. So all of the scientific sort of work that the gardens gets involved with, or even just interesting sciencey stories about plants and about the plants that we're growing. And we're going to be able to showcase each and every one of those in each library bay. Each library bay will have its own theme. And as you can kind of see here, L1 through to L7, each one has a theme, such as the Kakadu hibiscus here. So there'll be interpretation there for it. There'll even be, interpretation's been a massive part of this project. And there are all sorts of levels going on from written signs through to audible sort of experiences there. So downstairs, we want to try to capture some of the interesting things about the gardens, and one of those is our partnership or belonging to Parks Australia. Parks Australia is an organisation that looks after remote parks like Uluru Katajuta, Kakadu, and Christmas Island National Parks as well, and other islands as well. So, but here's a good example of one of our collections. So Cycas rumphii, which was collected from Christmas Island right outside the Governor General's office. And that plant is getting on to 25 years old now. And we plan to put that down into the display. Because of our unique sort of connection with Christmas Island, we're able to get things that clones of plants that other people don't have access to, which is a real benefit. And one of those things is Brugueria gymnorrhiza. Whilst that's not an endemic to the island, it occurs throughout the tropics. But on Christmas Island, it only occurs on Hosny Springs, which is a Ramsar listed wetland. It's really unique wetland that's been lifted up as the islands sort of come up from sea level. These mangroves have gone along that journey with it, and they're the only examples of these mangroves not at sea level, and they behave really differently in that space there. We had that challenge, of course, as many of you Horts will know. You get something new into your collection and you've never grown it before, and sometimes you know that there's not a lot of people out there who's ever grown it either. So we had a lot of trouble figuring out how to grow this thing until we just put it in water and it just worked for us. But then we've got to think ahead. And so if we want to put a mangrove in a display in our conservatory and we want that to be more or less permanent, how do we perpetuate that? How do we plan for that? So we've actually created a pot from aragonite. We basically break up all this rock and stick it all together to form some kind of a pot shape down in here, and then you can see we've actually planted in there. And the idea is that the mangrove roots will grow through those spaces in that pot and eventually break that pot apart by its robust root structure. By the time that pot breaks apart, it'll be self-supporting and we won't have to ever repot it. So some innovative sort of things that we've done to try to create those displays. Some other unique opportunities. So this is the Christmas Island Dales waterfall fern, Pneumatopterus truncata. Again, it was a first for that species to be grown in this country. It's not endemic to the mainland. You'll only find that on Australian soil on Christmas Island. So it's very sensitive to cold conditions, as we've found out, and we'll be putting that into one of our library bays. Other things of interest, this is a 52-year-old pup pandan. We want to put that into the conservatory, but it's on a lean as well, which is quite deliberate because it was hitting the roof. It still is hitting the roof, but we put it on a lean to sort of give us more time to grow it before it was basically pushing the roof off the greenhouse. We want to get that into the conservatory as well. It's a stunning plant. Other things of interest too, like so Kakadu, we've got access to amazing collections in Kakadu. Our seed bank has had significant seed collection programs through that area, and a great example of that, of what we've actually been able to do, is to grow the very rare Kakadu hibiscus brennae. We grow it quite successfully. As you can see, we can flower it really well. All these images on the right are it flowering, but it also it has a fairly short displayable life before it gets a little bit tired looking. So to keep a display like that ticking over, we have to keep programming new seed sowings into our program. And with every display, you know, we've got backup displays for it. And with every backup display, we need backup interpretation. And so for every library display we've got, we're going to need several backup concepts going at any one point in time. And so this is just a good example. Carol's here is showing off what we're doing with ant plants. So ant plants will be one of those reserve displays that we can move in and out whenever we need to. Other sort of transient sort of displays in our libraries will be things like orchids. The Botanic Gardens here has had a significant collection of orchids that are not necessarily native to Australia. To us, that sort of isn't a restriction. It's more of an opportunity to talk about the evolution of some plant groups without the thought of, you know, border constraints or things like that, and to show off some of these plants that we've been growing for a long time. This is one of the native Phalaenopsis orchids, which is arguably really stunning. So we're looking forward to getting that into the display at some stage. But we're also, as you can sort of see, experimenting with the types of displays and how we might display each one as well. The construction of this project, as I said, it's just this immense concrete building, and it doesn't sound very appetising at all. Even when I saw the designs, and I thought, well, kind of doesn't interest me. But when we've had the couple of opportunities where we've actually been able to step down into this space as it's being constructed, and have to hand it to the architects that the space is going to work with or without the plants. And I think that's really important. And then it's our job to then complement that space with the plants. Together, I think if we get it right, it'll be an absolutely stunning building and a stunning display that will serve the gardens well. It's not to say that we're not expecting challenges either. With any sort of, you know, abstract building will come challenges with, you know, what conditions is it going to be like? Where are the niches? Where will be the dead spots, etc., etc., and what are we going to do in those dead spots? So our horticultural approach it is quite planned, but it's also quite flexible, and we use our collection to sort of provide that flexibility. So this image is where the building's at now. So I don't know whether it's half finished or 3/4 finished or what, but I think one of the questions that, if I don't answer it, is when is this thing going to open? And that's a very good question, because I don't really know. But I mean, at the moment, we're working to a deadline of February 2024. But in reality, these bespoke, very tricky builds will have delays, and they won't be controllable from anyone, or there's a lot of contractual stuff that I do expect to push out the build even further. And then you know, if it pushes out 1 or 2 months, then if February pushes out to sort of April, then we start thinking horticulturally, there's no way I really want to fly plants or drive plants down from North Queensland and lift them through, get them outside into Canberra's sort of potentially very cold conditions in late April. That would kind of be madness, and it's not something that I want to do. So we would then push that right out till sort of October. So that's why I don't really understand when the building's going to finish. But all we can do is just keep plodding along horticulturally and keep our plants looking good. That's it for me.
Thank you, Joe. Thanks for that. That's another great project, and a lot of work. I know we're gone a bit over time, so I'll just be quick. And thanks again to our presenters. Really fortunate to have you guys come and speak to us today and giving up your time. If there's any questions, I'm more than happy for you to email me and I can pass them on and try and find the information out for you. So thanks again, everyone, for coming along. Enjoy your day.